All right, ready?
Yep.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
And I am Gold Eagle Jake. And
we're
just
down
us
Dan
two
again.
tonight. Damn it, Dan.
Dan had distiller stuff to do. So yeah, he's not here tonight.
That's much less important than talking about bourbon on a podcast.
That's true. The job always comes second, Dan.
I know.
Just so
Come
you
on.
know.
Mm-hmm. But we're back. We took a little break. We each enjoyed a little time away and a couple of very hot weeks in the summertime. So I don't think we would have been drinking too much bourbon anyway. But we're back and we're going to be talking about trends in the bourbon industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, even since starting this podcast, there's been several major trends that have come through, and then some others, that I think came and went pretty quickly. That I'm sure we're gonna touch on, because I think Jake knows exactly which one I'm talking about when I say that.
Does it start with an A and end with an A?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we're at this point. We beat this horse to death, but there's so much bourbon out there, there's so much whiskey out there that something needs to happen for brands to distinguish themselves. And we seem to be in this groove of cycling trends. Maybe even calling them fads would be appropriate, amongst all the different distilleries, and all these things kind of seem to happen all at the same time. And they all kind of fade away at the same time, which is interesting. And yeah, I don't know if there's like corporate espionage amongst the major distilleries.
I mean, well, obviously
they all do the same things at the same time, which is kind of interesting.
I mean, they're obviously paying very close attention to the industry and what the consumer is grabbing and buying. And as you said, there's so many brands now and so many whiskeys available. Most people, I mean, of course, there's always still going to be new people getting into this category, but most people have kind of found their path on what they like and what they want to buy and have at their home bar. And COVID was definitely the big boom for that. People kind of went crazy and stocked up and built nice home bars during COVID and quickly realized what whiskeys they want to stick to, what distilleries they want to stick to. But of course, on top of that, there's always going to be something new and something hot. And this industry is kind of driven a little bit on FOMO. And as soon as there's a new trend that picks up and people are saying is really good, I think other distilleries right away are trying to capitalize on that and take a little percentage of that market share.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that the lockdowns were kind of a blessing for the consumer and a curse for the producers.
I don't know. I would say also a blessing for the producers.
Well, I mean, in general sales, yeah. But trying to keep up with the consumers' demand, and also trying to anticipate what customers were going to do. Like, the average person maybe would go through a bottle, every couple weeks or something in like a normal time. But since no one was doing anything during COVID, you're going through a bottle a week, or maybe even more in some cases. And like there was so much time for people to just burn through to trying different things.
Time
and like you
and
said,
money too.
Right. Yeah.
Not going out to dinner twice a week and
Mhm.
spending $15-$20 on a cocktail or two has probably freed up a lot of money in people's budgets to use that towards the same thing, liquor, but just for stocking bottles at home.
Yeah, and I think even it probably drove people to like the bottom, quote unquote, bottom shelf kind of bottles where it was like, well, hey, this thing's been there forever. It's $15. Like I might as well try it. And some of those are some of the best. So, it's and
But
then,
it
why
also,
why go buy $100 bottle if, old granddad is your favorite, you know?
yeah. I mean, it also, it could be a curse as well because we kind of created a false, sense of buying, if you will, for these
Mhm.
distilleries because there was a huge boom. We all know everyone was buying a ton of booze, and all these distilleries at that time started ramping up. And we've seen a lot of new distilleries pop up. So
Mhm.
all this expansion at some point, and Dan is, lighting his eyes up right now when I say this, but all of this expansion at some point is going to need to slow down because there's just going to be too much whiskey than what people can not only buy, but also drink as well. So, trends are a big factor, I think, in who's going to survive and who's not. Are you going to be one of the first distilleries to hop on one of these new trends and take a portion of the market share? Or are you, going to fall behind and come to the game late with these trends and get stuck with a bunch of bottles on the shelf and in your warehouse that people don't want?
Right. Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like we're already seeing a little bit of a market contraction, so I think it's inevitable. Well, I mean, and you've said this before in our debates that the rates that booze was selling across the board were totally unsustainable, and it was inevitable that there was going to be a decline. And I think we're starting to see that now. I think.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I
it'll
think it's
probably continue for the next couple of years. But um, I don't think that the bourbon industry is in danger of total collapse
no, we're
in the way that Dan likes
far.
to
No, no, no,
prophesize.
no. We're far away from that. Let's be clear. We're very far away from that. I would just say the thing that I didn't really see coming, and most people probably didn't see coming, is how much these distilleries are expanding, and how
Yeah.
many new
Mhm.
distilleries are popping up. I mean, every major distillery is doing whatever they can to distill more, age more, build more rick houses, running multiple stills, running stills 24/7. So eventually we're going to hit a point where a lot of the guys, and hopefully it's not all smaller guys, but it will probably be a majority of smaller distilleries that just can't keep up anymore. Um, and that's why I think right now price point is so key and important, because
Mhm.
the small craft guy who's producing a 5 and 6 year and charging $60 or $70 might get some business right now, but as soon as Buffalo Trace, Heaven Hill, we're seeing it with Heaven Hill. Heaven Hill now
Yeah,
has
already. Yeah.
McKenna pretty much. Oh, I mean, McKenna is about to be readily available, but right now, as I speak, is the first time ever we've had McKenna just sitting on the shelf.
Mhm.
We're starting to get more lately, and this is the first time it hasn't sold out like immediately after posting. And Elijah Craig Toasted. Speaking of trends, Toasted was a big trend, but that's now readily available.
Yeah, and
And
on sale in some
on
places,
sale in some places. And
which
the
is
bottled,
crazy.
I know, and the bottled and bond 7 year, that's now readily available and usually on sale at places. So I give major props to
Mhm.
Heaven Hill. So let's jump into our first trend. Let's talk about the toasted trend, which I think is
Yeah. So I mean, this
probably.
is
I think it's probably the
Yeah, this
most
is timely
legit
too.
trend, and it's probably one of the only ones that I could really see staying for the long run.
Hmm.
Because I do think a toasted bourbon is something the American palate really enjoys, and it's not, it's not like a wine finish or any other kind of spirit finish where it's too funky or fruity. It just
Hmm.
kind of enhances the notes that we already love in bourbon. So
Right.
props to Heaven Hill on making more Elijah Craig toasted, because it really isn't hard to make more toasted bourbon. It's a little bit more expensive. You need to order freshly toasted barrels and then take an extra couple of months to finish the bourbon in those barrels. But it's not like creating a new mash bill or an entirely new yeast strain where you need to wait for the whole
Hmm.
product to age. They're just taking already matured product and throwing it in a toasted barrel for a couple months. Um, that was always, I think they were one of the first to kind of come out with a toasted, especially a widely available toasted bourbon.
Hmm.
And props to them for just saying, hey, we're all in on this. We're going to make our toasted bourbon a core item where everyone else is kind of fighting to keep up with stock on toasted products. So I think if you're coming out with a toasted product and it costs more than the Elijah Craig toasted, you're shooting yourself in the foot, and it's going to be kind of hard to compete with that $55-$60 price point of Elijah Craig toasted.
Yeah, for sure. And they recently just announced that they're expanding to a toasted rye, which is
You,
super exciting to me personally. Um,
I mean, I'm
but
very excited over that.
it's a absolutely perfect next step. Um, and I'm looking forward to that being on the shelf, hopefully right out of the gate, but we'll see.
I think
Probably not, but
I mean, I don't know. I think it will soon enough.
yeah,
It
it'll probably
seems,
do the Jack Bonded thing where it's hard for the
yeah.
first couple months and then it's everywhere, but
It seems
we'll see.
like Heaven Hill understands what they need to do, and how wide their reach is. And so when they come out with something new now, they're pretty much making sure they have enough to hit everywhere in the U.S., which is a
Hmm.
lot. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
one of the biggest name brands, Elijah Craig and bourbon. So there's a lot of people that are going to be looking for that, and I think it's really, really, really good for the rye category as a whole to have more exciting things on the rye
hmm,
side, because that's going to pull a lot of people who think they only like bourbon and don't really care for rye into ryes, and maybe they'll expand into other ryes as well.
yeah. I totally agree. In general, I think ryes are pretty boring in terms of like the secondary kind of finishes or whatever.
There's not
Like,
really any trends with rye whiskey
yeah,
that
yeah,
the only one I can really think of, and there's probably more that I'm not thinking of right now, is like malted rye came out, and
yes,
that was pretty popular for a little while. We saw a New Riff come out with a malted rye, Smoke Wagon come out with a malted rye, and
hmm,
it seemed like for a little bit of time, anything that was a malted rye kind of came and went pretty quick. Um, but yeah, other than that, there's not really a whole lot in the rye segment with you know finished trends and whatnot.
yeah.
Um,
To jump back into the toasted,
yeah,
it, toasted is more or less an offshoot of a double oak. And everybody knows Woodford double oak. I don't know if Woodford was the first to do it, but they were the first to make it widely accessible for
mm-hmm.
sure,
Yeah. I was
and
gonna say, double oak is
crushed it.
another double oak is another trend I had written down to discuss, and obviously it came out before toasted bourbon was, but
Hmm.
I do think Woodford was kind of the first. They might not be the first ones to do it, but first commercially readily available, widespread double oak bourbon. And I remember 7, 8 years ago, when people kind of thought like that was, I think it was the only double oak bourbon, but people kind of associated that double oak concept with Woodford. Like they would come in and ask,
Yeah.
"Do you have any double oak?" And you knew that they meant Woodford. Um,
hmm
so yeah, double oak is kind of the first trend, I think, outside of like French oak finish and Maker's 46, which was the first commercially finished bourbon. I think double oak, that concept, was kind of the first major trend to appear. And yeah, like you said, toasted is kind of the same thing. They're just doing a toast instead of a char
hmm
um, on the barrel, so which is a more slower and lower heat point on the barrel versus charring it. We're just lighting the whole thing on fire for a shorter
Yeah.
amount of time. So
Yeah. I mean, and both of those are really something that almost every distillery should have an offering of.
right,
'Cause like you
yeah. If you make
said,
a bourbon,
it's a secondary finishing process. It's not difficult to do. It's a little more expensive, but logistically, it's not like, you know, like you said, changing mash bills or creating wild, experimental,
and it's
things. So
yeah, and it's not offensive. It's
right.
like
hmm
any other finish can be offensive to some people. I mean, this double oak toasted concept literally just enhances the notes that were already there in the whiskey, makes it more caramelized, more sweet, more vanilla. So I think double oak, if you're a distillery that has whiskey, there's no reason why you shouldn't come out with a double oak of some sort.
Yeah. hmm Yeah. So I mean, I would say that toasted or double oak is probably the most successful one that we've seen. Um, yeah, there's quite a few double oaks out there. A lot of them are more in like the specialty release kind of realm of things. Like Peerless as the double oak. Trying to think of some others. Jefferson has like the twice barreled
Oh yeah, the twin
or
oak.
twin oak.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean there's a few that are readily available or they're
And
specialty
there should be
releases, but
more.
there should be a lot
Like, come
more.
on.
For
There
sure.
should be way more.
Yeah.
Like
Because
it's
there's not even a requirement to use a new barrel to finish. It's like you could just reuse old barrels and
yeah,
still get a double oak
definitely
label.
you're definitely not going to get as much like flavor enhancement. And I don't know, you yeah, you're right, there's no requirement, but I don't think it would do much to put it in another used barrel. I think the whole idea is to kind of, you pick up a
Yeah.
lot of the whiskey's color and flavor in the first 6 months or so in a barrel when
Mhm.
it's fresh. So I think putting it in a new barrel is definitely going to make a big difference. But you're right, there's no requirement. But still, like it's not like we need to re-age a whiskey or re-distill something. This is just putting a whiskey into another oak barrel. There's enough different types of wood finishes. There's enough wine finishes. I think most people's palate, at least the people that I know, prefer something more traditional, outside of the occasional cool finish or different treat.
Mhm.
And we all know you can't drink a port finish all the time. Like, you can't, most of the time you
Yeah.
can't have more than one pour in a night. Like, it's just kind of something to switch up the palate, a nightcap or something like that.
Mhm. Yeah, and on the toasted side, you've got Michter's Toasted, which is probably the most sought after toasted whiskey available.
They probably were in the discussion for being one of the first toasted
Mhm.
as well. I mean, they came out before Elijah Craig, but
Mhm.
Michter's Toasted is so limited. I mean, a pretty big size store, and we usually get about 2-3 bottles a year of Michter's Toasted. So
Yeah.
if I was Michter's, I mean, obviously they've got a reason why they're not doing this, but why wouldn't they come out with more? I mean, they've raised the price on their Toasted almost double. I think about double since when it first came out. So
Mhm.
they can make a lot of money on that, and they're still keeping it very limited, which is good because it creates demand. But if we hit a point in 5-10 years where there's just a huge surplus of whiskey, are people still going to want to pay 120 and at that point probably more, 180-ish for a bottle of Michter's Toasted when there's going to be a surplus of everything else out there?
Right. Yeah,
You
that's a
know,
good point. And then
so
I'm not really comparing apples to apples here, but like you have the Elijah Craig Toasted and even the Basil Hayden Toasted is pretty damn good. And those are, under $40 or something like that. So, or under 60 maybe.
yeah, Elijah Craig
Versus
under
like
60.
150 or
I think they're
200 something.
both, yeah, they're both probably around 60 or under. I know Elijah Craig's like 59.99 on our shelf right now, but yeah, like this is if I was a distillery like Michter's, this is the time that I would step up and kind of make a bigger name for ourselves in the market, because in 5 years, in 10 years, once Buffalo Trace has all their products on the shelf, once Heaven Hill, is producing tons of old fits because they realize what people want and they make more of it.
Mhm.
It's only a matter of time while this stuff ages, uh, until people can get their hands on it whenever they want. So I would capitalize on the trends right now, make a name for yourself before it's too late. I mean, we saw the same thing happen with beer.
Mhm.
Breweries that purposely tried to make their stuff limited, Goose Island, has now like kind of fallen off, and people don't want it anymore because it's priced a lot higher than other products that are very similar on the market, and people know that now they're producing a lot of it. But 5 years ago, when nobody could find it, if they mass produced it, I guarantee you they still would have sold out whatever they put out. But now
Mhm.
that they finally were like, hey, let's make more of this, it's a little bit too late.
Yeah, right.
So, like, going back to that Goose Island point, like, if I were them, I would make a ton of proprietors this year, a ton of the reserve stuff this year. Capitalize on the ones that people are going to chase down and actually want, and maybe make less of the ones that sat around for a couple years.
Mhm.
Try to bring back the limited factor in that. But yeah, so Toasted, Double Oak, I think those are kind of the two main biggest trends that we've seen. Got anything else to add onto that?
No, I think those are clearly like the most successful,
Mm-hmm.
um, and probably the longest lasting trend. You know,
Yeah,
um,
one probably the
so I
only one
guess
that I could see lasting for a while into the future.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like you said, like there's nothing offensive about them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing like preventing the continuation.
A
Like
good
no one's
this.
gonna be like upset that you're
Mm-hmm.
doing toasted finish or double oak finish. Like
Yeah. So this is a very good segment into our favorite Amberana.
yeah. So yeah, I know like we're probably like split 50-50 in our listener base on people who really like it and people who can't get anywhere near it. Um, that's been my experience talking to people. I don't know about yours.
I mean, I'll tell you my honest opinion with Amberana. I really like it, but I can only have so much of it. Like I don't want more than one
Mhm.
pour in a night, basically. Even if it's an Amberana bottle that I really, really like, one pour per night is good for me. So I think, and I
Yeah.
think most people that like Amberana are on the same boat. I'm sure every listener has tried an Amberana bottle before because that trend was huge in the last year, and then we
Mhm.
saw it quickly kind of fade away. And I think it's for that same reason that I said. Like, some people hate it, some people really like it, but even the ones who really like it can only take so much of it because it is so potent and very offensive. And that's really all you taste in a whiskey is the Amberana.
Yeah. And it's like, I think also a lot of distilleries and blenders for that matter just didn't do it right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a lot of people went really heavy handed with the finish, and um, the thing with Amberana, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this in other episodes, but you need very little time in the Amberana barrel to get flavor, and I think people have told us that it's like we're talking like weeks, like tops, like like 6 weeks tops, and then you start totally overtaking the flavor profile of the whiskey.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think another thing to mention that I definitely killed the Amberana craze was Amberana barrels are very hard to get and they're very expensive. So
mhm,
most of the Amberana that we tasted and have seen came from Amberana wood chips or Amberana spirals thrown into the barrel. And I just don't think you get as much balance and complexity when you throw staves or chips into a barrel versus actually aging in an Amberana cask.
yeah,
Because with a barrel, you're
yeah. I
kind of
mean,
yeah, I was just gonna say you're
yeah. Go ahead and finish.
slowly maturing the whiskey, slowly finishing the whiskey. It's the same reasoning behind the brandy proofing method, where you're slowly adding water over the course of a couple months. If you hit it all at once, you're just not going to get the same effect as if you kind of slowly layer it in. So the fact
Hmm.
that most companies used chips or spirals, and also the ones that were using actual Amberana barrels, most of them would reuse the barrels, and you just don't get the same effect when you reuse the barrel. There's
Hmm.
a night and day difference. Starlight is a good example because they're the ones that kind of pioneered this Amberana craze. But when they first came out with their cigar batch, which is Amberana finished, they only used first fill barrels. And then they realized how expensive these barrels are and how people loved it so much. So they just started reusing the barrels. And it was still good, but it was nowhere near how good it was compared to a first fill whiskey into the Amberana cask. So I think the
Hmm.
over usage of the chips and the spirals kind of faded Amberana out much quicker than it maybe should have.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about when we did the barrel craft Amberana finished. I think we agreed that that was probably one of the best that was released, as it had just like a very light um, uh, amount of the Amberana like spiciness and like that cinnamon and stuff, and it complemented the bourbon very well.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to knock you over the head with the Amberana aspect of it. Um, and I think I said this on that episode too, or I've definitely talked about it at some point, that I think they messed up going so heavy into Amberana finished bourbon. And I was talking to one of the guys last night after the master class about this, that rye finished Amberana really should get its shot. Um, like I've got this dark arts that I think I talked about on the show in one episode that is just unbelievably good. Um, and the rye just meshes so much better with that sweet cinnamon and baking spice than bourbon does, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a amazing transition, because I was literally about to talk about how rye works better with Amburana, and my example was going to be the Dark Arts rye.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I wish more. We would have saw more Amburana rise before this trend kind of faded away, because there are some really really good rye whiskeys right now with Amburana, and they're just not getting the love and attention they should. And another reason why I think Amburana works so well with rye is because you already get a lot of spice in rye, and Amburana gives off a ton of spice, so it's kind of just enhancing the spice and also
Yeah.
making it sweeter at the same time. You kind of get like a sweet spice to it, like a super unique one would be the Hard Truth Mellencamp release number 2. I mean
Hmm.
that's like a whole nother beast, and one of the most unique off the chart whiskeys I've ever tasted. But they blend their wheated bourbon, which wheated bourbon has a little bit of spice, with chocolate malted rye, and then finish it on toasted Amburana.
Hmm.
And I remember sampling this. I think we might have talked about this on an episode, but they even said, like, we know we're late to the Amburana trend, but we think we have something here that is truly unique and truly off the charts. And it doesn't matter that we're too late. People are still going to dig it. And it's one that I think we've gone through about 6 or 7 cases, and I've not really heard any negative feedback. In maybe one or two people like really don't like it, but it's kind of either an absolute hate it or absolute love it thing, and most people seem to absolutely love it. But yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to see more Amburana rise, and I think that's a good coupon segment, because I do want to give a coupon on that Dark Arts Amburana rye. So I think we're gonna do BMDAAM. I know that's a little confusing, but B A B M. No, I'm gonna make it more simple. I'm gonna make it more simple. That's too confusing. All right, BM Amburana for 10% off the Dark Arts Amburana Rye. BM Amburana, 10% off the Dark Arts Amburana Rye. Works online on our website, as long as the Amburana Rye isn't on sale. But yeah, that rye is a great example on Amburana done right. Um,
Hmm.
I've heard so many people back up what you said, that Amburana is just better with rye whiskey, and it just kind of works better. So if you're a fan of Amburana, on the fence of Amburana, I would highly recommend trying a rye finish in Amburana before you make up your ultimate mind on what you think about Amburana. But definitely the most
Yeah.
polarizing
Totally agree.
trend we've ever seen in this industry.
Easily. Yeah.
Hmm.
um. So yeah, that leads me to talk about um. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why Amburana works so well with rye is the sweetness that you mentioned. And
Hmm.
one of my other favorite finishing types is rum,
Mm.
particularly rum finish rye. And I do think there was quite a bit of rum finishes that all kind of came out at the same time. Um, I think I've said this before on the show. Definitely have said it to you and Dan, but I am not a fan of rum finished bourbon. I think bourbon's already sweet. It doesn't need more sweetness. And that's where rye really benefits. Um, but I know a lot of people love those like sugar bomb kind of pours. Um, and that's like, their thing. But I think overall, finishing in used liquor casks in general, I think, is another trend, that's still ongoing. And if we segregate that from wine, we'll talk about wine finish because that's kind of its own thing. But like we've seen tequila finish whiskey, rum finish whiskey, cognac finish whiskey, Armagnac finish whiskey. So there's a lot more. Did I say cognac already?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's all kinds of these liquor based finishes coming out, from other liquors that get cask finished. I know I've already talked a lot about it. So what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan. I'm always a fan of something new and something different. I don't think any of those were kind of like huge things like Amberana, where like everyone was coming out with an Amberana, and that was all people were talking about for a couple months. It's just kind of more spaced out, so I don't think it's really like really popped off as like a huge trend. Any of those recently? I mean, maybe 2 years ago, like Armagnac finish kind of became a thing, and we saw a few things come from that, but it really didn't stick around for long. So I don't know if any of those were, kind of like huge trends. I definitely enjoy whiskey that's been finished in other liquor. I think it just makes the whole experience a little bit more unique and kind of changes paces on things. But there's not, it's I would say it's a little more forgiving than Amberana. Like, I could drink 3-4 pours of a cognac finish or a rum finish whiskey in a night, where I definitely couldn't do that with Amberana. So I think, it's a little more forgiving. There's a little more range with what you can taste and what you can do with that type of stuff. But yeah, I don't think we've gone through a period where it's been a major trend where we've seen all these big distilleries do the same type of liquor finish. Rum, I think, was probably the biggest one. When Angel's Envy came out with their rum finish rye, I think people really liked that. And then, we started to see other rum finish whiskeys out there.
Yeah, I think rum is probably the most successful out of all of those. And like it seems like distilleries, especially some of the more experimental minded distilleries, are trying these different cask finishes from different spirits. Like Old Elk comes to mind. They've got a few different interesting, spirit cask finishes. Bardstown, is doing a lot of these collaborations with people, different spirit brands. So, but I don't think the industry has found that like perfect marriage in the way that they did with rum.
Right. And no, I think another trend that's worth mentioning, which, I think is still here to stay, but definitely went through a big boom about 6 months to a year ago, is the cigar blend or cigar cut, whatever you want to call it, trend.
Yeah.
Which, we know there's no legal definition to a cigar blend or cigar cut, whatever you call it. It's just kind of whiskey that's meant to pair with a cigar. Starlight called their cigar blend an Amberana finish. Old Elk Old Elk's actually doing some really cool things with their cigar cut. Like, they're kind of changing it up a little bit on every release and just doing 1 or 2 releases per year in terms of the finishing barrels. But Magnus, obviously the pioneer with that Armagnac and Cognac finish cigar blend. But cigar blend kind of came hot for a little bit. We started to see a lot of other cigar blends, Wheel Horse, Old Elk, Magnus upping their blends, and probably a few others I'm not thinking of, but there were definitely a bunch of cigar blend. I think about a year ago was the new and hot thing that people were jumping on, and I don't think it necessarily went away forever. but it just kind of faded a little bit, so that it's not like everyone's jumping on the trend. It's just here and there, a little bit of this, a little bit of that with the cigar blend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a little bit more cost prohibitive for the consumer in most cases. So you're talking about blending several barrel finish whiskeys that are already expensive because of the barrel finish, and then combining them to an even higher price point. Yeah, I think you're probably be pretty hard pressed to find a cigar cut under $100.
Right.
Most of them are like 120 and up. So that's definitely probably a factor on why that didn't perpetuate in the same kind of vigor that
for the Wheel Horse, defying all odds, $35 for their cigar blend or cigar cut. You got to be careful with what you say, because I think well, I know Joseph Magnus trademarked cigar blend.
Yeah,
that's why
I think so.
That's why nobody else is called a cigar blend. It's called cigar batch or cigar cut on the Old Elk.
Yeah.
Yeah, they trademarked cigar blend. So there's different cigar versions, if you will. But that, I think, was kind of a trend that will still be around, but had its hot moment and then kind of dissipated a little bit. But yeah, I think definitely worth mentioning.
Yeah, and also one that you're probably only having one pour of.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to chain smoke.
Yeah, I mean, most of them have a ton going on, and yeah, it's usually pretty offensive with its flavors, even though they usually carry many different types of flavors depending on what bottle we're talking about. So it can get old pretty quick if you're just drinking that same cigar batch all night.
Yeah, and it's a lot of them are specifically designed to be paired with smoking a cigar and
right.
enhance each other.
That's the whole concept.
So yeah, drinking it by itself is not as enjoyable. Period. So yeah, again, you're limiting your customer base a bit there.
Right.
How many people are really smoking cigars that often enough to buy multiple bottles a month or a year or whatever. So so wine finish is obviously huge. Primarily port, because of Angel's Envy mostly.
Yeah, I was gonna say we nodded off to Angel's Envy on their rum finish rye. I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't mention Angel's Envy bourbon finished in port. They were the first ones to make a commercially and widely available bourbon finished in a wine cask. I myself am not a huge fan of port finishes, and once again, I think I like more ryes finished in port than I do bourbons. But lots of people love Angel's Envy. It's a really good gateway bourbon if you're trying to get into sipping bourbon neat. It's lower proof. It's a little bit sweet because of the port finish. So I think
still pretty complex.
Very complex for its low proof. So I think it's worth, just Angel's Envy did good in those. I mean, they're a huge name in the industry for a reason. Like they kind of pioneered. They did pioneer the wine finish, and then they kind of pioneered the rye with the rum finish, and they're the first rye at its price point to become a very good seller, and it still continues to sell very well. It's definitely our best-selling rye whiskey at the $90 price point, and I think that also is because they're kind of a household name. Like even if you don't really drink bourbon too often, you probably have a bottle of Angel's Envy if you're a drinker around your house for when you do want bourbon. That's probably what you're going to go to. It's easy to
Yeah.
find, easy to drink. It's a cool looking bottle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it's definitely like a statement bottle.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, other wine finishes, there's the generic red wine finish that was hot for a second, probably like last year and a half ago, I feel like that popped up and kind of went away pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm not really a
Though
big
there's
fan
still
of like Pinot Noir and Cabernet finished
yeah.
bourbons. The only one that I've ever tried Pinot Noir finish that I like is our Dark Arts blend. That's Pinot Noir and Armagnac
Mhm.
finish. And when Macaulay was making that blend, I said like, I'm not a fan of Pinot finish bourbon. I have not tasted a single one that I enjoyed. And he was like, just trust me, just wait and try this. And he was right on that one. But yeah, that kind of, I think Thomas More, when they first came out and they had the Cabernet, and I think they might have done a Pinot one too, but then we started to see more red wine finishes, and then that kind of quickly went away. It's too, in my opinion, too tannicky. Like it just kind
Yeah.
of, if it's not a sweet wine finish, it just kind of dries out the whiskey, and you're just left with like red fruits in a drying mouthfeel that isn't the best.
Yeah, and like to me, like the amount of fruit that red wine usually imparts on the bourbon isn't like it's just off to
Mm-hmm.
me. Um like it doesn't pair well with the kind of fruity notes that you get in bourbon naturally.
Right.
They're kind of like opposed to each other, so yeah, I don't think it works
Yeah, I think
quite well all the time.
that's a good way to put it. Like it just, the natural fruit notes that are already in bourbon are good enough on their own, and it doesn't need to be
Yeah.
complemented by anything.
Mm-hmm. I know I've seen a white wine finish in Irish whiskey. I can't think of any in bourbon or American whiskeys.
So there, Thomas More,
Um,
2 years ago when they came out with the Cabernet finish, they came out with a Chardonnay finish, and
okay.
that was my favorite of the Thomas More releases that year. And I'm surprised we haven't seen more Chardonnay finishes. I don't think it's something that will be a big trend, but I do think, kind of it kind of brightens up the whiskey and lightens it up a little bit. And I'm surprised we haven't seen more like Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay finishes. And also, Chardonnay is very buttery, so I feel like that helped the whiskey as well.
Could go well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm actually very surprised we haven't seen more Chardonnay finished whiskeys out there. Like just to dabble into the market, like see what it does, type of thing. But yeah, that would be good. There is white port, like the blackened Wes Henderson release is white port finished. I think that's a really good whiskey, very unique. With that was $100 suggested retail bottle we have right now for 60. If you're interested, that
Doesn't Chattanooga do that too?
they do, yeah, they did. Which
Yeah.
I think we have like 3 bottles on the shelf, but as we know, everything Chattanooga is kind of like one and done when it comes to all their finished stuff. So yeah, Chattanooga and the blackened are the 2 white port finishes that I've had or at least that I've had recently. But I think the blackened is a really, really good whiskey, and the white port kind of just like sweetens it up a tad without getting all those tannin notes that you get from any kind of red port, or other kind of sweet dessert wine. But
Yeah, I'm trying to think of any other wine finishes that I've seen.
so Pinot de Charentes was, for at least in our store, was kind of a thing for a little bit because we did a barrel craft finish in Pinot de Charentes, which is a dessert wine from the Cognac region of France. But I know we've seen a few distilleries come out with that type of finish. It's a very niche and kind of rare wine just because it's not talked about often at all here in the States. So I think the casks are probably just more hard and rare to get than it's worth.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of had like a little boom in our store, at least from that barrel craft pick that we did a couple years ago. We got a lot of good feedback on that. But yeah, there's not really any other wine finishes that like really stand out as a major player outside of port, I think.
Yeah. And there's sherry.
Sherry, yeah, Oloroso. You see that more in Scotch.
Yeah. It's starting to come up in bourbon, I've noticed. I try and stay away from it because I don't really care for sherry finished stuff.
I don't
in
really
general.
care either. But I mean, Pedro Jimenez PX Sherry is definitely the best of the best when it comes to sherry. So anytime there's something that is finished in Pedro Jimenez, I usually try to try it. But you see a lot more of that in the Scotch world than you do bourbon world. And again,
Yeah.
I think Pedro Jimenez also, or sherry in general, Oloroso, PX, whatever type of sherry you're using, is also way more tanniny than like port would be. Port kind of sweetens it up a little bit, and you get the red fruit, and sherry kind of dries it out a little bit, and you get the red fruit. So I think that's kind of why we see more people go towards port than we do sherry.
Yeah, and like I do think it does lend itself much better to Scotch than it does to bourbon.
Yeah.
Scotch, we've talked about, can be pretty like floral or fruit forward, and like juicy, and the sherry kind of drying things out a tad can kind of balance it a little
Absolutely.
bit, give it a little bit more sweetness than Scotch typically has on its own. It's usually much more like cereal kind of sweetness rather than like a fruity sweetness. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know about you, but I got one more trend to bring up, which I think that's about it for me. But the last thing I was going to bring up is high proof.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of comparable to toasted, where it's here to stay, but it kind of had its moment. Maybe it had its peak. There was a point about a year or two ago where I think everyone was just looking for the highest proof bottle they could get their hands on. And hazmat, oh my God, hazmat bourbon. People were going crazy if it was over 140 proof. But I think a lot of people's palates realized, okay, this is cool once in a while, but I can't drink this all day long. It's just going to fry my whole mouth.
Right. It's almost impossible to go from high proof cast strength to anything else and really be able to appreciate
No.
the subsequent things that you're trying to taste.
Yeah, because at that point you're not going to taste any flavor. You're just gonna it just tastes like watered down what you were drinking before. If you go from high proof down to low proof. But yeah, I mean, again, I think it's here to stay. It's not going to go away. It's not easy you can't just flip a switch and make a high proof bourbon like you can finish a bourbon, especially because the max entry point into a barrel is 125. So it needs to sit there and age, and it needs to have the right conditions around it for it to rise in proof. And have the water evaporate faster than the alcohol. But yeah, I think it's a trend that maybe had its peak. It's here to stay, but it's not something that it's not like we can put anything out there that's 140 proof and it'll disappear right away. Like, people need to try it first. A good example is our Woody Creek barrel. Barrel is phenomenal. It went all the way to the finals in our blind tasting bracket, and we still have some. And people just haven't tried it, or they're afraid of Woody Creek because they've tasted their regular stuff. But this single barrel is a totally different beast, and it's actually alarming how many people have tasted this blind and have guessed 100 proof, and it's 139. I mean, before we picked it, we tasted it out to probably 20 people and had them guess the proof, and the highest guess was 115, and it's 139.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard some
wild.
people were guessing 90 proof.
That's a little questionable.
It's a little questionable, but it has like some super sweet candy notes where you could definitely be deceived for how high its proof is. And I will say it's much different tasting it knowing how high its proof is. Like, if you tell someone, hey, I got a hazmat bottle, I want you to taste it, and they taste it, then most of the reactions are, oh yeah, I can taste that it's that high in proof. Like, I wouldn't have probably guessed 139, but it tastes up there, versus just blind pour, don't say anything, just pour it, let them taste it. Most of the time they think it's a lot lower than 139, but I'll throw another coupon code in for that just because I believe in that bottle a lot, and I think more people need to try it. BM Woody, 10% off the Woody Creek hazmat pick while that lasts. But
nice.
Yeah.
That is a very good bottle.
It beat our Four Roses barrel proof pick.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised at how well it did in the blind bracket.
I was too.
Like you said, it made it almost all the way.
Made it to the finals. Lost in the finals to our Bardstown pick, which was a phenomenal single barrel.
And sold out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think the only other thing we wanted to talk about was where we think trends are going to go in the near future. I think we could see some more. Like, I think we're going to see more spirit cask finishes. I could really see tequila finishes taking off, especially as tequila gains popularity, which I think it's the number one selling spirit right now.
It is.
If I'm not mistaken. So I think that's going to probably take off.
I think that's a very bold
You've got a lot of
take.
Partnerships between big distilleries and tequila brands. So
it's a very bold take, but you're spot on. There's a ton of partnerships. A lot of these distilleries send their barrels down to Mexico. If they're not sending them over to Scotland, they're sending them to Mexico to age tequila. So there's a lot of two-way partnerships going there. I've had some really, really awful tequila barrel aged whiskey. I've had some really, really good ones. So I think it's very hit or miss, and the distilleries that can do it right are gonna capitalize on that for sure. For me, I couldn't tell you what the next trend is gonna be, and I have a feeling it's some type of wood that we haven't even heard of yet. When we were in Kentucky earlier this year, and we did a tasting with Macaulay from Dark Arts. I can't even remember the types of wood that he was talking about, but he was talking about how he's the first ever American whiskey to be finished in these two types of wood. And at the tasting, he told us what they were, but he said he legally shouldn't even be telling us what types of wood he was finishing in. So I think there's going to be some new things that come about. Some of them might be big misses, but some of them are going to be big hits. And then we're going to start to see bigger distilleries and more distilleries kind of hop on these trends with these different types of oak. And it's just going to make it more interesting for people who are super into it, like you and I.
Yeah, that's actually, I like that take a lot. Zane, we recently talked about the barrel Mizunara
Mm-hmm.
finish, which is super uncommon, mainly because it's normally really expensive. Um, and that's, I would consider fairly exotic, and most people probably have never tried a Mizunara finish. Yeah, I could see a lot more like experimental wood types coming in the near future,
Yeah.
especially with the, although short-lived, massive success of
Yeah.
Amberana.
I mean, it is a
I think
massive
that's
success. Everyone who drinks whiskey knows about Amberana, whether you
yeah.
like it or not. But yeah, I think different types of wood, and I also think the cooperages are going to start to get more into it and more involved with different proprietary toast levels, char levels, and different combinations with the types of wood and those char and toast levels. So I think there's a lot of very, very exciting things to come with the type of wood and finishing whiskey and even aging whiskey, maybe. So,
Hmm.
we might be at a point right now where maybe we're leveling off a little bit, but I definitely don't think we're dying off. And I think there's a lot of exciting things to come within the next couple of years in this industry.
Yeah, the only other one I want to touch on that we're actually going to do a whole episode on, so I don't want to
Mhm.
talk about it that much. Um, but is grain to
Oh,
glass
yeah.
is a buzzword right now, or buzz phrase right now. Um, in my opinion, is going to, as long as laws allow it to like proliferate through like every major distillery is going to try and pass off some kind of grain to glass offering. Um, because people like the idea of this like locally grown, all like self-contained kind of thing. If Dan was here, he would say that Whiskey Acres is estate grown and estate distilled. And he's a little bitter about how they're trying to define estate
We'll
grown and
we'll
estate
save
distilled, but I'll
that.
let him get into that.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you're listening, make sure you pay attention to that episode because I have a feeling it's gonna be a very, very good one. Dan,
Dan's gonna go on
any
a
any
rant, so
episode
be
where
ready.
Dan gets heated is a good episode.
Yeah. So yeah, that's either going to be our next episode or next. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one because that'll be good too.
Cool.
All right. Shout outs,
Shout out,
plugs.
yeah, I don't know, plug. I mean, if you want to use these coupon codes, go to goldeaglewine.com or download our app, BM Amberana for 10% off the Dark Arts Amberana Rye, BM Woody for 10% off the Woody Creek hazmat barrel that we have. But yeah, goldeaglewine.com, download our app on the Apple App Store, Google Play Store, follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. And where can we listen to Bourbon Matters besides everywhere?
You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify, Google, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, click the notification bell, thumbs up, leave comments. We've got another comment or DM topic coming up as well from a friend of the show, Julia. So thanks for that, Julia. That'll probably be a few weeks out in the schedule, but yeah, we like to hear from everybody.
Absolutely.
So don't just talk to me at Gold Eagle. Leave
Yeah.
comments. Though I like when people talk to me too. It's fun.
I love when people come up to me at Gold Eagle and they're like, "Ooh, is that Jake from Bourbon Matters?" I'm like, "Yeah, go say hi."
Don't act like I'm special, please.
I do get a handful of those people, and it's quite amusing. So yeah.
Well, I'm besides you, I'm the only one that ever shows up because Dan lives in the middle of nowhere. So unless you go to Whiskey Acres master classes, like the one last night, which was a total blast.
Total blast.
It was awesome.
We could have spent a whole episode talking about that masterclass, but oh man, I'll just leave it at that. Check out our Facebook and Instagram post from today, which is 4 or 5 days earlier than when this episode is going to air, to just see what was poured. But super grateful for Dan and that opportunity for our customers to taste some experimental things and kind of guide Whiskey Acres on where they're going to be headed in the future.
Yeah, hopefully you get to see more classes like that from all kinds of different brands, because that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's cool to get a break from the blind matchups and just get to kind of spend a little bit of time with each thing individually and like figure it out, you know?
And also, you know, a break from just whatever we know, like here's something behind the scenes that's being worked on. And what do you think? So,
all right, cool.
Thanks for listening.
We will see you guys next week. Cheers. I don't have a glass tonight.
Well, what are you drinking out of? That's my rendition of a cheers.